Hi everyone, I'd like to thank you to the IOL INTACT webinar. Today we're going to be covering BGP, a couple of housekeeping items for the webinar. There's a chat window on the side that allows you to put in questions. So feel free if you have any questions during the webinar to post them there. We'll try to answer them. Some of them we'll answer during the session if we're able to. Others we can save to the end, and we'll go through as many questions as we can to try to get them resolved or answer any questions you might have. Another thing I'd like to mention is in the Northeast, there is a snowstorm right now. In the unfortunate event we lose power, obviously this webinar will stop a little early. I don't think we'll have a problem, but just wanted to give everyone a heads up that that is a potential situation. There's also a poll that we have. We're always interested in finding out information about what people want to know about INTACT and what it's capable of. So please feel free to take that poll whenever you have a chance. Thanks. And today, onto the webinar. We're going to talk today about BGP, the newest INTACT package. There's several things we're going to talk about: why BGP, what RFCs we cover, how we're testing BGP with INTACT, device automation. We're going to do a little section today on INTACT roadmap and some of the new things coming down the pipe for INTACT. And then we're going to do a quick little demo of BGP running on INTACT. Why BGP? BGP is a primary routing function that's been around for quite some time. For those who don't know, here's a couple little tidbits. It runs over TCP. Often here at the lab, we build different tools for customers based on interest, and we've seen several requests for this. The IOL has been testing BGP for some time here at the lab. Some of the test cases you'll see today have been around for over a decade. BGP is not a new protocol, so one of the reasons that it's become more relevant to people is a lot of people are using BGP in SDN deployments. So they want to make sure, that their BGP deployments are set up correctly. Their new implementations, a lot of cases, data center host, things that are not normally routers have been doing it. So we've added this functionality to allow people to test our BGP testing that we've been doing in-house. Here are some of the RFCs we cover. These are the base RFCs. There's lots of BGP ones out there. We cover almost all of the must inside of here. One thing about our current version of the BGP tool, and this is a little bit of a departure for us, this is the first package we've offered that runs only over IPv4. We expect to have a v6 version available soon, but the first version of this is available only over IPv4. And these are all the different RFCs it covers. Later on, we'll talk about what components. While we cover all of these RFCs, it's not a requirement that a device to be able to support this covers all of these out of the box. A lot of times, you'll have different components that you'll want to implement. Communities, for example, are one that you may or may not implement in your individual implementations. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about INTACT and what it can do. And in this case, it has fully automated results. It's also got some flexible options that we'll be talking about. I'm also going to do a quick reminder for those who haven't used a ton of INTACT, just to go over some of the features INTACT has while we're doing the BGP demo. Here is just a quick reminder of the INTACT components. We have a license manager, the INTACT app, which used to be called the client. We now call it the app, and this is sort of helping people clarify which component is which. And then we also have the IOL INTACT packet generator. That used to be called the server. We're calling it packet generator now. This is just showing, this is probably our most complex setup we have customers use. And this has, two INTACT clients typically running on a desktop, laptop, someplace out in the QA lab. And then here are the actual packet generators. Very often they're running in virtual machine environments nowadays. They can also run on bare metal hardware. And then we have the direct connection that directly connects directly connects us to the device under test. In this case, we're going to be talking about BGP, so it's going to be routers. And in our case, there's going to be two lines connecting to the device under test, because we're going to need two interfaces for this testing. So one thing to keep in mind with this tool is you only need INTACT and the router that you want to test. All of the other components that show up in these very complicated test cases are simulated by INTACT. So they'll create, if you need several routers to run an individual test case, INTACT will simulate all of the different routers. So there's no need to set up a complex test bed. It is just the router and INTACT. INTACT also configures the router for each individual test case, and that's from setup to teardown. And one of the reasons we do that is it allows for continuous testing. So it allows you to run all the testing in a row. It also allows you to, for R&D purposes, if you want to run one test case over and over again, or you had 20 fails and you want to run just the 20 fails, you can run them in any order that you want. So each test case sets up and tear down. It does make some of the test cases a little bit longer because it has to set up everything and then bring it all down, but it also has the advantage of all the things I mentioned before. So it allows for continuous testing. It's based, and I'll show this later, on the BGP Conformance Test Plan. I put a link in here. It's a pretty large document, and so as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing this testing for some time, so this is based on the testing that the IOL has always offered. The setup in this case for the BGP routers is there are two interfaces for testing you need on the router. They need to be isolated. In other words, that they're not connected to a live network with lots of different traffic. That's really for testing purposes. We don't want to cause extra packets or extra issues that might trigger false failures or false positives. It also works on physical or virtual interfaces. So some of our customers will use VLANs. Internally, we use VLANs at the lab. You can also just have two physical interfaces connected if you're using hardware to two NICs connected directly from the INTACT packet generator to the device under test. Also in this case, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, we need a management connection between the INTACT app and the router under test. And the reason for this is automation. We need to be able to talk to the device under test so we can automate it. The router must support BGP over v4. One thing I do want to mention is it's not required to support all the features we test. We're going to have labels and methodologies to easily select which ones, like aggregation, communities, those kind of things. If a device doesn't support it, you don't have to run them. It's totally up to you to demonstrate what your router is capable of supporting or what BGP sections you actually want to support. So this is the first IOL package that requires automation. What that means is that you cannot run this manually with the user sitting there watching the prompts come up. In this case, the reason is because BGP is very complex and very configuration heavy. And the original version, we did this for our students, and was, they were getting all the pop-ups and configuring it. Very quickly, they found that monotonous, and they wanted to automate it. So that's what we've done. So we have a BGP bash script here that I'm going to show later that allows you to automate all of the test cases. You can only run it with the automation, so you have to set it up. The user guide, we're going to have a detailed user guide that will basically document every test case and what commands you have to have implemented. When you see the list, it's quite a large list. You don't have to implement them all depending on what features you support. So we're going to have a pretty detailed user guide for this. Another thing I wanted to mention is part of our yearly membership for people who have INTACT. If you ship us the router, or we have some version that we could set up, I think that we could set it up and do in-house scripting. So what this means is we would set up all of those individual test cases, use our undergraduate and graduate student resources to configure your router to set it up for the automated testing, and then we can give you the automation script so that you can go off and run the testing on your own. Several groups have used this where they are taking our automation scripts for in-house testing. So this gives you the ability, basically, this is part of the support we do. We work with you to help automate the device. It also helps talking about the individual test cases. If you have any questions about those, all of that support's included in the yearly membership. Most of our customers have been using that to run the testing here at the lab and then getting a report in particular for routing protocols. But this allows you to run the testing in-house. We will still support you the same way. If you have a question about a test case or something's not working, we'd be more than happy to work with you. And like I said, if we can get it to work for automation, we will share everything we have with you as part of the process of working together. We're planning to make this available May 2018. There's a 30-day demo available right now. So we are working on that. It's going to have the same yearly licensing fee that all of the other packages of INTACT currently have. So that's what we're looking for. After I finish all the PowerPoints, I'm going to demonstrate some of the individual features of this. You guys can get a sneak peek at it. This is where I wanted to talk a little bit about future INTACT areas that we'll be heading to. We think in the fall of 2018, we've seen several requests for this, and we're going to try to meet them, is have a RESTful API. This will allow more continuous integration, agile type testing where people wanted to kick off runs every time they commit code or make any changes to the test setup. Another feature we're going to be adding is running testing directly from the CLI. Right now you can run testing from CLI, but you can't set up the individual device configuration. You have to open up the GUI, set up the device, then close the GUI, and then run it on the CLI. So it works great after the first time. Some of our customers have asked us to bring in that device support into the CLI, so we'll be adding that in a future release. I mentioned this earlier. We think BGP conformance testing, we're going to add that over v6. In this case, it's going to be becoming a US government test case. Right now, we only do interoperability for BGP. We'll be adding the conformance once this is available. It will be supported. It'll be part of the US Gov test program, and you'll be able to put it on your SDoc. Simple firewall, this is RFC 6092. And that is an RFC for home gateways mostly, a simple firewall, making sure the firewall's up and running. One of the requests we get here a lot as v6 has been deployed, and it continues to get deployed, is firewall support. What does it look like? What kind of testing is being done? So we've added that as an option. Oops, sorry about that, one too far. We're also going to be doing updates this summer to core DHCP and IPsec. Most of those at the moment are bug fixes. There's also, we will be, as the RFCs rev, we'll be putting out updates of those. So updates to core, DHCP, and IPsec. So for a minute here, I'm going to move over to the tool. So today I thought I'm running this webinar from my house, and one of the things of not being in the lab is I didn't want to run the testing live because I'd be over the VPN, and I thought it might be a little slow. So in this case, I've already run some testing. I don't think it's that fun to watch testing, so there's probably no loss on your guys' side. But here, we've run some of the testing, as you can see. Just a couple of reminders for INTACT. There's a summary window that's here that allows you to run multiple testings of a device, keep the individual results with a full log and capture of each run. Let me open up a capture while I'm here. So you can click on an individual test case, load the capture. It will pop up a Wireshark that shows the individual packets that were sent. In this case, keep alive. So you can see the BGP notification messages. Tracks all of those. In this case, we have things that aren't supported. In this case, the device didn't support EGP. All of those run, set up, the same as typical INTACT. The configuration actually for BGP is, this window is actually pretty limited. You put in the address of the device. We also, in this case, because we generate TCP endpoints, we need to know the MAC address of the packet generator. So we put that information in here too. It's pretty straightforward. These are the test interfaces. And then we need the router ID of the device under test, the router under test. So the configuration window in this one is actually pretty straightforward. The more interesting thing that you guys might find more interesting is the functions. So over here, as you can see, are all of the BGP functions that need to be supported. As I mentioned, several of these exist, but you may or may not support them. So configuration, for example, route, reflection, community, all of these test cases, it's entirely plausible that your implementation may or may not support. So something to keep in mind. These are areas that we will, we'd work with you to try to implement them as needed. Over here, let's see what I have. I have aggregate enable. So here I've just taken a quick example of some of the scripts that we run. We've clearly document inside of here. Let me back this up. This is a bash script that we have, and we document every argument that you may or may not use to allow you to show. So in this case, this is a very simple, adds an interface and puts an address on an interface. So in this, it has the number of arguments. And then over here, we have in this case, we've I've got a second file just opened up so you can see both at the same time. This allows, here we're using expect on this device. One of the advantages of using bash is that it allows you to call any function. So we have some customers who call netconf or resconf or SNMP resets, those kind of things from the bash script. In our case, I've demonstrated today, which this is a pretty common one for us inside the lab. We use expect to log into the device, configure it. So here you can see, to disable the max number of prefixes. I've got all the different commands in here. This is a lot of the work that we will do as part of the support membership. So in this case, we configure the router, we set up the VLAN ID, we give it an address, and we back out. It's really that straightforward. Again, our user guide is going to contain all of the functions that an individual test case might need. So if you don't support certain test cases, you'll be fine for that. Over here, we have the individual test plan that we support. So just to give everyone an idea, I'm going to go to the table of contents here. These are the individual test cases. So we have a good set. We have the basic processing one, the finite state machine, error handling. The extensions is where you will have, I'm sure, a lot of protocols you may or may not support. Inside of here, unfortunately, there's not one topology, so it's different for every test case. I'll scroll through a couple. So, the basic ones are very straightforward. As we get more complicated, the pictures become larger, obviously more complicated. This document is available on the IOL website and clearly documents the test case, where it came from inside of the RFC, so you can go see that. And again, as part of the membership, we'll help support you. There are a lot of test cases here. It's a 100-page, roughly 100-page document. We want to work to support you, help you out. A quick reminder, if you have any questions, we expect this webinar to go about 30 minutes, so we have about 8 minutes left. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them up on the site. So as I mentioned, every one of these has to be supported. Test case runs perfectly fine. It runs using the automation. We also have the ability to generate a HTML file. So in this case, I didn't run all the test cases this morning, but in this case, we have a little, as a reminder, we have this window here that shows the individual test case, all of the test scripts that were run, skipped. This is a document that you can send to other people, whether it's your R&D, people inside your organization, other customers, to show what you're doing. It clearly documents each test case, the log and the capture for that test case, which is pretty nice. So that exists. We also have, as a reminder, the stats window that clearly shows how many test cases you've passed, how things are going, gives you an individual count of the test case runs. So those are all the different features that Intact has. Let's see if we have any questions before we have to head out. All right. Yeah, so this will, one of the questions we got was about licensing. So the question is, how does the licensing work? In our case, we have a license manager, and each seat allows you to check out one, each license that you purchase allows you to have one instance running at a time. So what that means is you could have Intact apps on 2 different machines, but only one of them can be testing at a time. So it could check out a license and run testing. This is called a floating license model. So this allows users in different regions. So often, a customer will have time zones apart, have 2 different labs. They can both be running testing. In other words, one can have it for an 8-hour shift, and then another lab can have it for an 8-hour shift. It allows you to check out the licenses, run the testing, and it runs very effectively that way. So that's a common question we get. All these test cases are automated with pass-fail. So anything that you run, it will list pass-fail and have a nice little log documenting what the issue might be. So this one has a fail message. The RUT did not send an update message to TR1 with the med attribute set to the correct value. So we have logs that have detailed information to tell you what you need to do. And as I mentioned, the individual procedure for a test case, in that case, this was a med attribute test case, so it was 13. Our individual document, the link's included in the webinar. If you have any other questions, actually I should mention that for contacting us, there are two main ways. One of them is intact@iol.unh.edu. If you have any questions about the Intact tool, I know some of you here focus on other areas such as DHCP or CE router. This tool is focused on BGP, but if you have any questions about those, you can also send anything to that mailing list. That's where we respond. You should get a response from us fairly quickly if you write that list. There's also the IOL website. If you have any questions about Intact or how the tool works, you can go to www.iol.unh.edu. I'd like to thank everybody who worked on this presentation. In particular, we've had lots of routing students who have spent some time working on this BGP tool over the years, and all of them contributed to this. In this case, to give everyone an idea, we have probably in this case, we've had somewhere around 20 to 30 undergraduate students at some point or another contribute to this BGP conformance and Intact tool. So part of the IOL's mission is to educate students to work on this tool. And we think we've achieved that here by giving them the ability to update these scripts, edit them, learn the networking protocol, but also learn software development to be able to work on these types of things. So it's an exciting part of what we do here at the lab. And I'd like to thank everybody who participated in working on this BGP conformance tool. I'd like to thank everybody who came to the webinar today. We expect to have another one in another quarter. We haven't picked a topic yet, and that's part of the poll. So please fill out the poll. Let us know what you're interested in hearing about, and we'd be more than happy to show it to you. Thanks, everyone, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.